Hey you guys, welcome back to my Flickers of Fear movie review series. So, if you guys watch any of our regular episodes, our live streams, a while back, probably a couple months ago, Tom and I did an episode about Betty Davis and Joan Crawford and the, very infamous feud between them. And during that show, while we were talking about Joan Crawford's later career, I mentioned that I had seen a few of her films from that era, such as obviously the excellent Whatever Happened to Baby Jane, which we also reviewed. That came out in 1962. And the decidedly less awesome Trog from 1970, which I believe was her last film. But one movie of hers, from this time period, that I'd always been really curious about seeing and never had was her 1964 movie Strait-Jacket, which was actually directed and produced by William Castle. Now, Strait-Jacket was pretty clearly made to cash in on the massive success of Whatever Happened to Baby Jane. She was pretty much put in horror movies after that point. And it probably would be accused of being a Psycho ripoff if it hadn't been written by Robert Bloch, who also wrote the novel that Psycho was based on. So, seeing Joan Crawford playing a crazy axe murderer seemed like it would be a damn good time. So I looked on Tubi, there it was, so I was able to watch it for free and finally get to see it. And honestly, I was kind of surprised at how relatively restrained it was. It's kind of melodramatic, but not as much as I was expecting, because it has a very lurid premise, so I was expecting it to be way more over the top. The opening scene was over the top, but after that, it kind of turned into actually a pretty gripping, psychological horror story with some really good acting performances. Now, anybody that's at all familiar with the horror genre in general will likely guess what the twist is very early on in the story, as I did. But honestly, that didn't really diminish my enjoyment of the movie. Your mileage may vary, of course. The narrative of this actually reminded me a little bit of the plot of the later movie Psycho 2, which came out in 1983. That was actually written by Tom Holland. Robert Bloch wrote a sequel novel to Psycho that was also called Psycho 2, but the movie wasn't based on that. They just had Tom Holland write a completely different story. So I'm talking about the plot of Strait-Jacket being sort of similar to the movie Psycho 2, not the book. So let's get into Strait-Jacket. Let's get into a Strait-Jacket, shall we? I didn't even mean to say that, but okay. So we start out with this kind of flashback, and there's a woman named Lucy Harbin, who's played by Joan Crawford, obviously, and she comes home early from a trip and finds her husband in bed with another woman. Fun fact, the guy playing her husband, you can barely see him and he's only in it for a second, it was actually played by Lee Majors in his first film appearance, although he is uncredited. So Lucy sees this and flips the hell out, as you likely would, grabs an axe from a stump outside and, hacks both their heads off. So, in shadow, it's not super gruesome or anything like that. Now, the couple's daughter, Carol, who everything I look at says she's 3 years old. I thought she looked older than that to me, but I don't know. It's everywhere. It's IMDb, Wikipedia, everybody that has a synopsis says the kid is 3, and I'm she looks a lot older than 3, but whatever. She's 3. Now, she actually sees the whole incident, the whole axe murder, from her bedroom across the hall, because the door's open, and she's just looking on in horror, obviously. And shortly afterward, Lucy is dragged off to an asylum, screaming and, clad in a straitjacket. So we then jump ahead 20 years. Now, daughter Carol is now all grown up and is actually played by Diane Baker, who's been in a million things, but I immediately recognized her as Senator Ruth Martin from Silence of the Lambs, which is one of my favorite movies. So she's actually telling the story of the axe murder to her boyfriend, Michael, in order to prime him for the imminent release of her mother from the asylum, she's getting out. Now, since her mother was sent away, Carol has been living with her Aunt Emily and her Uncle Bill. They live on this farm, and they actually set up an art studio for her because she's a sculptor. She does other art too, but she mainly does sculpting. Now, the farm also employs a very obvious red herring handyman named Leo, who's actually played by George Kennedy. This is one of the earliest roles I believe I've seen him in, because I was like, wow, he's pretty young. And the character he plays is just such an overt creep that you just know that he's not guilty of a single thing. So the ostensibly cured Lucy arrives on the farm, and it's a little bit uncomfortable at first, but Carol is just like really happy to see her, and so eventually like Lucy starts feeling a little bit more relaxed about the situation. Now, Lucy looks about as dowdy as you would expect someone to after they'd been in an asylum for 20 years. But she also seems much calmer, but she's still like real unsure of herself. Like she doesn't really know how to navigate the situation. Now, Carol very excitedly shows Lucy a bust that she made, like she sculpted of her mother's face, like when her mother was young, what she remembered her looking like. And she has like a photo album that she's compiled with all pictures of her and her mom, like from her childhood. And she also shows Lucy, weirdly, that she has kept Lucy's jangly charm bracelets. And these were bracelets that she happened to be wearing when she did the axe murder. And it's pretty obvious that the jangly sound they make is pretty triggering for Lucy, because it reminds her like of the axe murder, because, obviously the bracelet was like jangling while she was swinging the axe, you know what I mean? So Carol like apologizes for showing her these. I guess she thought it would be cool or whatever. And then Lucy's like, yeah, okay, why would you keep those? But, but she's like, you know what, Mom, I would really love it if you looked and dressed more like you did when I was a little girl, because Carol wants her to appear as she remembered her. Now, I don't think it was ever mentioned whether Carol had visited Lucy while she was in the asylum. Maybe she wasn't allowed to. They don't really bring that up, so I'm assuming that she didn't. So yeah, I mean, this is a pretty weird request, but Lucy is so desperate to reconnect with her daughter after all these years that she's like, okay, fine, I'll do it. So Carol takes her mom out shopping, buys her a dress and like some jewelry in a style more like what she wore 20 years ago, and also gets her a wig like in the same style and color as her hair used to be back in the day, because now it's kind of just, like I said, it's very dowdy and kind of gray and just like all swept back. Now, Lucy, like I said, isn't sure she's really on board with all this, but Carol seems so eager about it that she just goes along, you know what I mean? While they're out shopping, though, Lucy thinks she hears some little girls outside the store singing a rhyme about the axe murder she did, which is basically just the Lizzie Borden rhyme, like Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her father 40 whacks, or whatever it is, but just with the name replaced with Lucy Harbin, you know what I mean? But when she goes outside to confront the little girls, they're not singing that. They're singing like a different rhyme. So you're starting to think, could it be, perhaps, that Lucy is not as cured as the doctor believed she was, and is possibly starting to have hallucinations? For a while, it would seem that this is indeed the case, because later that night, I think it's the same night, after everybody's gone to bed, Lucy wakes up and sees her husband's severed head and the mistress's severed head like lying on the pillow beside her, and then there's also like a bloody axe like laying on the bed. So she freaks the hell out, as you would, but then and runs and gets Bill, Emily, and Carol, like wakes them up, and they follow her back to her room, and there's nothing there. So Lucy understandably starts to think that she might be losing her marbles a little bit. But Carol, because she seemingly wants her mom back in her life so bad, she insists, she's gonna be just fine. Everybody just needs to be patient with her as she like readjusts to regular life again, right? This opinion also seems to be shared by Uncle Bill, who is, obviously Lucy's brother. Aunt Emily seems a little bit more skeptical, but, she's kind of open to it too. Carol also thinks that it would help Lucy tremendously if Michael, her boyfriend, came over for a drink, like to get to know her. Now, Lucy protests. She's like, look, I'm really not ready to be meeting people just yet, just give me some time. But Carol eventually kind of persuades her, And there's then an extremely awkward encounter where Lucy comes out in all of her young Lucy duds, like her dress and the wig and everything like that. She quaffs back a couple whiskeys, I think they are, and starts very obviously and very audaciously like seducing Michael, like right in front of Carol, like, oh, you didn't tell me he was so good looking, like putting her arms around his neck and everything like that. I'm like, whoa, Mom, goddamn. Like, yeah, it was really something. So this is obviously very excruciating. It goes on for like a really long time and very cringeworthy. But it is thankfully stopped by the arrival of Lucy's physician, Dr. Anderson. And he says, oh, I was on my way to vacation. I was going fishing, and I thought this was on my way. So thought I'd stop by and check and see how you're doing. Now, Lucy is still wearing the young Lucy outfit and is acting all kind of flirty and, sexual toward the doctor. And he gets kind of alarmed, and he's like, maybe we were wrong. Maybe you were released too soon. And so he goes to talk to Bill and Emily and says, it'd probably be best if she was taken back to the hospital for observation a little bit, because she seems to be having some problems readjusting. But Lucy doesn't react well to this idea and basically runs out of the house. Not long afterward, the doctor is out looking for Lucy in a barn on the property, because like I said, it's a big farm, and he gets axed to death by somebody that you only see in shadow. But it's almost certainly Lucy, because she has the jangly bracelets and she has the hair and everything like that. Later, Carol comes into the house and finds her mother back in her, dowdy clothes, sitting in the dark, in the living room. And she basically says, oh, I came in here to knit or something and I fell asleep. And Carol asks where the doctor is, and Lucy says, oh, he left. And then Carol looks out the window and sees that his car is still parked out front. And then Lucy says some kind of sideways shit about the young Lucy clothes making her act different, and she doesn't want to wear them anymore. So Carol assumes that her mother has killed the doctor. Now, since Carol seemingly does not want her mother to go back to the hospital, she decides she's going to hide the doctor's car in the barn and pretend that he never showed up there. Even when his office staff or his secretary or whatever calls the house because they knew he was stopping by there, they're like, nope, we haven't seen him. I don't know what happened. Problem, though, is that Leo, the handyman, saw what Carol was up to and rightly deduces that the doctor was murdered. So he very brazenly takes the car out of the barn and starts repainting it, basically saying, hey, it's my car now, And Carol starts berating him, is like, hey, bro, you're fired or whatever. And he very smugly tells her, hey, I know that Lucy killed the doctor and I'm going to tell the cops what happened unless you let me stay here. So, they have to kind of let him stay and let him have the car. Now, Lucy overhears this whole conversation. And not surprisingly, Leo also turns up dead in pretty short order. Now, aside from all of the axe murdering going on willy-nilly, there's also kind of a whole plot sideline of Carol and Michael wanting to get married, but being afraid that Michael's very, very wealthy parents, Mr. and Mrs. Fields, won't approve, especially after they find out about Lucy's murder record and subsequent incarceration. You know what I mean? Now, the Fields have actually invited Carol, Lucy, Bill, and Emily to dinner at their big mansion one evening. And Carol and Michael are thinking it's oh, maybe this is where we'll announce our engagement after the Fields meet Lucy and see she's okay. Now, the first part of the dinner party isn't shown. We get thrown kind of immediately into Lucy having a panic attack, in one of the bathrooms in the mansion. I think it's because the wallpaper is stripey and it reminds her of bars or something like that. She starts flipping out and having flashbacks and stuff. Now, Carol comes to help her. And it turns out what happened that Lucy was really nervous, obviously, and she spilled coffee on herself. And she's mortified that the Fields think she's some kind of weirdo. But Carol is basically, look, it was an accident. People spill coffee on themselves every day. Don't flip out. It's no big deal. Everything's fine. And they get the coffee stain out of the dress. And, she puts it back on and they go back to the dining room. Now, everything seems to be going all right after that. But then Lucy is left alone with the Fields. After the rest of them go to look at some new dairy thing or whatever. And they leave her there with the parents. And she actually lets it slip that Michael and Carol are engaged, which she didn't know that she wasn't supposed to mention, right? So big faux pas. Now the Fields get very aggravated and basically tell her in no uncertain terms, Carol is not going to be marrying their son. Now Lucy gets a bit, riled up about this. And pretty angrily admits she's yes, she was in an insane asylum, but, she's better now. And that doesn't mean that Carol isn't good enough for their, darling golden boy or whatever. And she tells them straight out that she wants Carol to be happy and she isn't going to let the Fields' snobbery like fuck things up for her daughter. And then she pretty righteously like storms out of the house. Now, after the Fields tell everyone else what happened, Michael takes Emily and Carol back home, and then him and Bill go out looking for Lucy because they don't know where she went. She took off, on foot. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Fields are kind of troubled by the whole events of the evening, and they start getting ready for bed. But Mr. Fields is axed to death in his closet upstairs by that same shadowed person with the jangly bracelets. Now, Mrs. Fields, who was still kind of downstairs, but she calls up to him and he doesn't answer, so obviously she thinks something is wrong, and she goes up and finds his bloody corpse. And she freaks out. And then, but before she can get out of the room, to go call the cops or whatever, Lucy seemingly pops out and threatens her with the axe also. However, as many of you have probably guessed by now, this is where the big twist is revealed. Moments later, the real Lucy comes into the bedroom. She was actually just wandering around trying to cool off, and she came back to the house to apologize to the Fields for her earlier outburst. She sees the other Lucy and tackles her onto the bed, only to discover that it is, surprise, surprise, Carol, wearing an identical dress and a wig to Lucy's, and wearing a mask of Lucy's face that she made from that bust that she sculpted that they show at the beginning. So see, it all tied together. Turns out it's been Carol hacking people up all along, but trying to pin the murders on Lucy and trying to make her look crazy. She even put fake heads in the bed, and she had a recording of little girls, doing the Lizzie Borden rhyme and all that other kind of stuff, to try and freak her mom out, try to drive her mom. That's the part that reminded me of Psycho 2. You know what I mean? Because they were trying to drive Norman Bates crazy again. And this is the same kind of thing that was happening. So Carol's been killing all these people in Lucy disguise, and she wants the murders to get pinned on her so she'll get sent back to the asylum. And Carol's ultimate plan was to kill both of Michael's parents so that her and Michael could get married, and then they'd inherit all of their money. But, of course, she was stopped before she could complete this mission. She only killed Mr. Fields, but Mrs. Fields is still alive. So after this whole scheme is unraveled and Michael sees what an absolute lunatic his girlfriend is, she is likewise shipped off to the same mental hospital that her mother spent so much of her life in. And then at the end, Lucy tells Bill and Emily that she's going back to the asylum willingly, too, so that she can look after her daughter and finally be there for her in the way that she never was before. So yeah, as I said, this is a pretty solid little horror movie. Not quite as melodramatic or as cheesy as I was expecting from a William Castle movie starring Joan Crawford. I mean, you'd have certain expectations about that, but it was actually much better than I was expecting. The acting was actually great all around, and the story had a real heart to it. Particularly Joan Crawford's performance as Lucy and the way she played against Diane Baker as her daughter. It had a real emotional core to it. If I had one slight criticism, and I alluded to this earlier, it would be that it was pretty obvious that Carol was the killer very early on in the movie. I think I figured it out right at the point, near the beginning of the film, where Carol became real insistent about dressing her mother up in the young style clothes and showing her the bracelets that she'd kept. I was like, that's a little weird. I bet that bitch is the killer, you know what I mean? And that she's making it look like she's trying to drive her mom crazy. So yeah, so I called it pretty early on in the movie, and I think most modern audiences would as well. But honestly, it was still an entertaining watch in spite of you kind of knowing what the twist was going to be. So yeah, I mean, if you're interested in horror films from this era and you want to see something that was inspired by Psycho but kind of has its own slightly lower rent charm going on, then yeah, this might be something you'd enjoy watching. Come to think of it, this would actually make a really good double feature with Dementia 13, Francis Ford Coppola's first movie, which was another kind of low-budget Psycho-ish homage that has an axe murder in it, although that one was produced by Roger Corman, not William Castle. So that will do it for this review. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please remember, share, subscribe, and comment. And I'll see you guys again on the next one. Bye.